Thank you for coming to our session today. My name is Adrienne Antonio. I am the Employer and Partnership Development Manager at the UCLA Career Center. I've been here for a year and a half. Prior to coming here to UCLA, I was recruiting for an education nonprofit. UCLA was actually one of my schools, so it's easy to transition into my role. I was with that organization for 8 years. I graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a sociology degree, and so I'm proud to be a Gaucho, but definitely proud to be a Bruin now. At the Career Center, I myself work with a lot of recruiters and employers, so I kind of run the gamut of talking to startups, tech companies, engineering companies, healthcare, so all industries that you could think of. I kind of help support them with their strategy on campus. But today we will have two great recruiters who are pretty seasoned, if I say so myself, who will share a lot more strategies of what they do on a daily basis, what candidates are looking for from their own anecdotal experiences, and then also we'll have time to answer any questions that you may have. But yeah, so thank you again for coming. And so we'll go on to bios right now. So we have Drew Greeley. He's the Director of Talent at Survios. He is also in your program if you want to follow along. I won't read all of it, don't worry. So right now he is responsible for the development of Survios recruiting strategies, as well as seeking out the most innovative people in engineering, art, programming, and more to work on seeking out the most innovative people in engineering, art, programming, and more to work on the well-established studio's ever-growing slate of acclaimed VR games, including the bestsellers Raw Data and Creed Rise of Glory. Do we have any video gamers over here? Nice. All right. So they're probably here to learn more about the video games than recruiting.
Exactly.
I
don't blame them.
Exactly. So like I said, Drew has a lot of experience recruiting. He has been at Survios for 3 years. And before that, he was in the nightlife in Hollywood. He did hospitality in the early 2010s. He definitely started recruiting with the firm Expansion. Thank you. I knew that. Expansion then oversaw technical recruiting for Instantly Inc. He is also the founder of Retention Recruiting, and he holds a BS in Business Management from California Lutheran University and attended University of California, Los Angeles Extension for the Senior Professional in Human Resources program. So this is Drew Greeley. Sorry, it's been early morning. We have our career fair going on right now, so I have to do all that employer check-in, so apologize. So that's Drew Greeley. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have Jasmine Faison.
Mm-hmm.
She is the talent acquisition leader with nearly a decade of technical recruiting. She started her career experience at Tech Systems, where she focused on recruiting for enterprise clients around the Los Angeles area. For the last 4.5 years, she has been working for BCG Digital Ventures, a startup builder based in Manhattan Beach. As the first recruiting hire for BCG Digital Ventures, Jasmine has played a key role in building out the team's recruiting function for North America. Additionally, Jasmine serves as a cornerstone to the company's diversity and inclusion efforts as a founding member of the Black Employee Resource Group. As a D&I advocate within her organization, she's also involved in the Digital Ventures Women Initiative. Outside of work, Jasmine enjoys spending time with family, interior designing, and community service. She also serves as a talent advisor for Balance, an early-stage startup which is a social platform aiming to bridge the diversity gap for Black talent. Thank you, Jasmine, for attending also.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's a very small room here. Love it. We'll be really informal, pretty casual, make it more of like a one-to-one small group discussion. So we're going to go ahead into our questions. A lot of my questions are definitely geared more for the general audience. I think everyone is essentially a job seeker or an opportunity seeker, information getter. So hopefully we could all leave this room with some great information to take back to our colleagues and our peers, especially back to our companies. So nowadays with just social media, a lot of virtual communication, here university recruiting has really gone up as far as just virtual interviewing, a lot of on-site office open houses instead of coming here on campus. So can you tell us what are some recruiting trends that you've seen over the past couple of years that your company is embracing or not, and how that kind of plays into what you do with your role?
Want me to
Want to
start?
take that?
Sure. So I don't think it's there yet, but it's actually interesting because obviously so just a little background on Survios, we do VR games, specifically tailored towards the high end of the market, supporting Oculus 5, Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and the PSVR. So an interesting technique that I actually just talked to a guy that's starting a company, he's based out of South America. He's actually using VR to teach classes in VR and actually as a tool to actually do interviewing in VR. So I don't think it's there yet, but I can see that obviously as the market continues to grow, that could be something in the future, is doing VR interviews, which are obviously a much more than a 2D screen because you actually have the body language as well, so it feels more real. But as far as like what we're embracing, in the beginning when I started 3 years ago, we had a very anti-remote policy. Not to say people couldn't work from home here and there, but like as full telecommuters, we weren't open to it. Just with the constant struggle in talent, and any of us know that have been in recruiting for a long time, that's why our job exists, because it is hard to find really top talent. We've started embracing the telecommute a little bit more. It's a case-by-case situation. Like we wouldn't allow juniors or mid-levels to do telecommute, but for like super seasoned seniors, we've kind of been a little bit more open to that. So that's a new policy that we've been adopting. And to be frank with you, in my personal opinion, I think 5-10 years from now, telecommute's going to be normal. It just has to be, with traffic increasing, population increasing. Everybody knows the struggle here in LA with traffic. You have to adapt to that, and that's going to be a big selling point for a lot of people, is to be able to offer telecommute. And so when companies start embracing that, they're going to attract a lot more talent. Now, it's not for everybody, because I've definitely talked to a lot of candidates that are like, I do not like working from home. So it's not for everybody, but I think it's going to be a more common trend off into the future. For me, personally, recruiting talent, as much face-to-face time as I can get. I think it's more personal. I think candidates embrace it more and appreciate it more. So I try to be in as many places as I possibly can, speaking at events like this. January, starting when I ramp up our university relations program, I usually start traveling around to the top schools that are specific to gaming. So I'm usually in Seattle for DigiPen, Texas for SMU Guildhall. I'll go to Vermont for Champlain, and then I do a lot of stuff local. USC has a great program for advanced game program for engineers. Noman is one of the best schools for art just art. And then there was Art Center that was good for design. Otis, I'm actually speaking at next week, which is also good for design. And then UCLA, of course. So yeah, face-to-face time I think is super, super important as a recruiting trend.
So one of the trends that BCG Digital Ventures has adopted is talent auditions. And essentially what that means is being able to show what you can do versus tell the interviewers what you can do. And so the way that we've set these up for our full-time hires is we have take-home assignments that the candidates will complete before coming on site to interview. And what it's allowed us to do is essentially see how they can perform from a strategic level. And in addition to that, what their communication and storytelling skills are. Not just tell us what they are, but actually show us how they think about solving problems. And it's proven to be very successful for our environment. And another thing just aligned to the talent auditions is we started to do hackathons. And what we saw with hosting those is, number one, talent that may not be familiar with our brand from an engineering standpoint is now looking at us as a leader in the space, right? They're seeing us as a player, whether it be blockchain or whether it be AI, machine learning, AR, VR. We try to, I'd say, create themes for each of our hackathons so that we can attract that type of talent that we're looking for. And so in addition to, them coming up with really great ideas at the end of a 48-hour time period and winning a prize, we also get to see how they perform in a team setting that's very similar to what they would do in our environment. And then we use that as an opportunity to extend offers at the end of the event. So it's proven to be very successful for just how we recruit and being able to see the talent in action.
Yeah, just to add on to that too, a couple of things. Brand marketing is super important, culture, and strategic partnerships. So I think these are big things to help, because you need to really, in such a competitive environment, you need to really get your company out there. There's tons of people out there, tons of companies competing for the same employees. So I think it all really starts at building a great culture and then making sure the messaging is out there for people to understand. I mean, to be honest with you, most of us spend more time, and this is an obvious, but most of us spend more time at work than we do anywhere else or with anybody else in our life, right? So if you're going to spend a lot of time somewhere, you want to be happy. You don't want to wake up every morning saying, oh my God, I got to go to work today. So that has to do with culture, and that has to do with building a great environment that people feel welcome, that people feel safe, that people feel that they can let their creativity out, that people feel that they're heard. And so it really starts there with a lot of things. And then from there, once you build a great culture, you need to figure out how to get that message out there. So a lot of that is doing the face-to-face stuff. A lot of that is doing partnerships with different people that run tech organizations, like the UCLA event. It's my friend Kevin Winston here from Digital LA, so we do stuff with them and do panels with these guys. And then also partnering, for me, obviously for the diversity initiative, I partner with WIGI, which is Women in Gaming International, which is a big women-focused group for gamers. So we usually host, similar to like a hackathon thing, but we don't do them just because our office is too open floor plan. So like if we have a lot of like IP and like stuff that can't be publicly announced, so it's hard for us to host that kind of stuff in the space just because there's private stuff all over the walls and people can see that, and then that creates a problem for us with our partnership. So, but we do host and block off the back section of the studio. We'll host big panels there for like Wiggy and stuff like that. So I think that's super important. And then just getting involved and active with the community as much as possible to kind of get that messaging out there.
Nice, yeah. Any way that you could share that brand awareness is really important. Although I know when I was recruiting, I was kind of my own lone one-man team for a lot of the SoCal region. So I'm sure that's probably the case for both of you, or maybe a small team, large team. But what do you think makes your recruiting strategy successful, especially with the idea of hiring quickly? I know, Jasmine, you mentioned that you are looking for almost tens and dozens of people almost every month, sometimes when you don't even expect it. Just depends on what the hiring managers are asking for. And then same thing with Drew. You just told me you're still currently in recruiting for 5 hires within the next 2 months. 15? Oh yeah, that makes a difference. It really does. So yeah, just tell me a little bit more about like what that recruiting strategy looks like and how do you think it makes it so successful?
You can start on this one.
So I started as the first recruiter at BCG Digital Ventures, and so I totally feel your struggle.
Yeah.
Since I started, we've been able to scale the team to a point where now we have recruiters who are skill set aligned. And I think the way that that impacts our recruiting strategy is that now you have recruiters that are dedicated and focused on experience design, on strategic design, on product management, on engineering. And so they're making connection points with candidates that even if, let's say, we fill our positions that we're actively recruiting on, they now have a network. They have a pipeline that they can refer back to so that when future headcount opens up, we can then start at that warm conversation first. And it's a very agency-style approach to recruiting, but I think that it works particularly well for our environment because our needs are ever-changing. 1 month, we may have like 3 roles in product management, and then the next day they could be like, hey, so we actually need to increase that to 20. It's just to make sure that we can address whatever the business needs. And so I think that that proactive approach to recruiting has proven to be very helpful in our environment. And also that skill set alignment has been pretty helpful as well. And I'd also say that another just approach to our recruiting strategy, because diversity is at the top of our mind in our organization, is making sure that we have balanced interview panels. So being very cognizant of trying to make sure that there's a woman on the panel, make sure that there's a person of color that's on the panel, so that as the candidate comes in and sees the environment, they're seeing people that are like themselves. And that ultimately makes the offer decision a bit easier as well when it comes time for them to make a decision on do they want to accept or not, because then they know more about your culture. And it's a very small piece, but I think that it goes a long way in helping to drive the recruiting strategy.
So I was the first recruiter too, and still the only recruiter. So the Survios brought me on when we were around employee 30, and then I had a very large task ahead of me to grow the company 80 additional people in 4 months, which you can imagine how much recruiting time that is. So I was working literally around the clock for a long time. So for me, being the only recruiter, the name of the game has always been organization, speed, and efficiency. So I'm not a recruiter sitting there tracking metrics, tracking data. If things are working, there's no sense in tracking data. Data is to give you insight into why things are failing. And I haven't had that situation yet, luckily, knock on wood. So yeah, it's speed and efficiency and just building networks. And for me, like, I remember everybody I talk to, and I save notes on everybody I talk to, and I code things in my email very specifically so that it's very easy for me to backtrack. And I always keep doors open with candidates. So even there's so many success cases that we had candidates that just did not pass the bar the first time around, but I kept a very warm feeling with them and a very warm letdown. And a year later, they're now working at Survios because they went back, they picked up the additional skills, they were determined, and then we revisited the situation with them. So my success has been relied on also empowering hiring managers, making sure our hiring managers understand the recruiting process, making sure they understand how to interview properly, and also giving them access to the ATS that we use, applicant tracking system, which is Greenhouse, and pushing them and poking them to help me review candidates. Because them obviously being experts in their field, because I cover every department in Survios. So I literally, any position in the company, I recruit. So sales, art, engineering, design, marketing, execs, like literally everything. So, which was kind of funny because when I first joined the company, you know, my background, similar to Jasmine here, is that literally I only did tech and product. And I did it for more traditional tech companies. I had some gaming clients in the past, but never really hardcore focused on gaming. So this was kind of my first real gig with gaming. And I did not know a single thing about what good art and what good design looked like. So like I remember being in there in the beginning and looking at like the first couple art portfolios. And I'm like, oh, this looks fantastic. And the artists are like, no. So there was a little bit of a learning curve for me too to like learn that. So creating those relationships with, the point of that is creating the relationships with the hiring managers served a double purpose for me and still does. Like it helped me understand better art because they were willing to spend the time with me to like explain things, what they're looking for, what I'm not seeing, but also it allows them to jump on that right away because within 2 seconds they know right away whether or not it's somebody based on, you know, tech skills if it's somebody that they're interested in. And then similar with Jasmine, you know, bringing everybody in large groups. So when we interview, it's always large groups. When somebody comes on site, it is no bigger than 2 to 3 people per panel. And we have about 10 to 15 people that interview through the course of the day. And then at the end of the day, we collectively get in a room together and we go around and each individual person shares. And the same thing. Diversity both in like who people are, but also in discipline as well. So, you know, we'll have females, we'll have people of color, then we'll have different people from departments. So even if it's an engineer coming in, still art's going to interview, design's going to interview, somebody from leadership's going to interview, and having that diversity in multiple ways helps give a really good point. Because again, everything drives back to culture. And part of building a good environment and a non-toxic environment where you don't want to come to work because people piss you off at work is making sure that enough eyes are on the candidate and making sure that enough people have input into the interview process. Because something that some people might not see, other people might not see, or other people might see. So that collective feedback with that diverse group of people is so, so important in the hiring process. And it's always our biggest goal, and I'm sure it's yours too. Never hire the smart asshole. Like that is our big goal. So literally for us, 50% of like whether or not we're going to hire you is obviously technical fit, and then 50% is do we want to work with you? Do you fit our culture? Do you fit our company values, our company goals?
Well, it kind of segued back into my next question, so that's kind of perfect. But definitely, I think what I'm hearing are, you know, relationships are really important. Building those with not only your hiring managers, but also the candidates, and making that whole connection and dynamic really seamless and seem very organic. Yeah, I guess, you know, candidates are always wondering, like, okay, what are they looking for? I'm sure the recruiting team is looking for something like this, but when I'm interviewing, it sounds like the company's going this way. So I don't know, this might be just something from your personal experience or just personal bias, but what are the top 3 things you consider when recruiting or hiring candidates?
I think I kind of just touched on that. Obviously, technical ability, you have to have somebody that can do the job, right? That's number 1. Number 2, but equally weighted, is personality, culture fit. That is equally just as important. Outside of that, I think really that honestly for us, it's really just those top. I mean, there's a million factors on why you're going to hire a candidate, right? But I think the 2 biggest ones that are going to rise to the top are the obvious, the technical fit and the culture fit for us.
So we hire across about 6 different core disciplines. And so each of those core disciplines is going to have their own top 3 technical competencies that we look for. Now, just generally, our recruiters are looking for entrepreneurial problem solving experience. So what type of problems or challenges have you had to solve in the past? Aligned to culture, similar to what your company looks for. We're looking for someone who is very accustomed to working in a highly collaborative, multidisciplinary teaming environment, because ultimately that is the setting that they'll be working with in our setting. So we want to make sure that people are comfortable, if they're on the business strategy side, collaborating and interfacing with designers and with engineers. And then the last thing is diversity of experiences. So I say that because there's some people that have very homogeneous resumes. So they've only worked at, for one industry, or only worked at one company. And those experiences are valuable. In our environment, having a variety of experiences is helpful because you're ultimately going to be serving or working on ventures where you're building businesses that are across verticals. And so you may be dropped into a problem that you need a different lens on how to solve for. So those are the top 3 things that I'll look for generally from a more like a soft skills perspective.
Yeah, and I agree. And just getting more specific on the culture side, what does that mean for Survios, right? So like team play, collaborative. Like we are a team. It takes an army to build a video game, so you can't do it by yourself. So you have to be a collaborative person. You have to be a team player. It is so important that those 3 departments work together very closely, design, art, and engineering. They can't be siloed. They can't be their own deal. They have to kind of interfuse. So touching on the same thing, engineers that come in that have some design sensibility or art sensibility, or vice versa, artists that understand some engineering or understand design, and same again with designers that have like an engineering background. People that can bridge gaps or at least speak the language of the other department is super important for that process and for that collaboration. And then of course, I always refer to gaming like teaching. Nobody works in video games because they're looking to make $1 million. People work into video games because they're passionate. It's something that I learned by being in gaming. Before, I didn't have an idea. Like I've worked at tech companies, and whenever there's a product release that's set to release, there's always some ramp up time and people have to work late hours. But gaming has a very common term called crunch. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. But crunch basically means that to like launch a Call of Duty, which is coming out in November, the next one, these guys will work for a year to year and a half, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's no joke. I'm not over exaggerating. So the amount of time that they invest into building these games is insane. And it's statistically, comp-wise, a senior engineer in gaming makes about 10% less than what a senior engineer in a traditional tech company makes. So they're making less money and working significantly more hours. So people do it for passion. So the reason I bring that up is passion. Passion is a big thing in the game industry, and we want passionate people. Now, the one reason I've had a lot of success, and this might be speaking to the first question, is we've prided our culture on being anti-crunch. So we are more in line with a traditional tech company. So for us, we've adapted something different in the gaming industry, and because of that, it's really helped to sell to people that love games, but maybe they're getting burnt out on doing games. And then they can come to us. We're like the greener pasture for them to come to and still experience their passion, but at the same time, like not have to sell their soul down the river to build the game, right? So that's a big policy for us, both with attracting talent and then retention. Because what I've noticed in this industry is, especially with engineering, a lot of senior engineers about 8 or 10 years into their career, they start getting married, they start having kids, and they can't and they don't want to spend that much time of their life, even though they still love games inside. They have now priorities are shifting a little bit, right? So a lot of them start leaving for normal tech companies. Like they'll go to Google, they'll go to Facebook, they'll go to a lot of the bigger tech companies where it's a more 9 to 5, more work-life balance kind of job. So we've been able to fish some of those away from going to those companies to come to our studio because we are more in line with that work-life balance. So I think work-life balance is a very big thing too.
Great, yeah. Honestly, I think if you're working so many hours and you are passionate, but you have other things in your life that are outside of your work day hours, I think it's important to know how much of your company's mission and culture play into your recruiting strategy, and then also after that, it may affect the retention of your employees. So if you could just tell me a little bit more about how your company culture and mission play into your recruiting, and then if you are or have been able to kind of get any feedback from your candidates about why or why not they wouldn't stay at a company, and how you've been able to maybe influence how that retention strategy plays for that company as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've hammered this point home, but culture, right? That is 100% a draw for people and a retention reason for people. Culture shifts will cause mass exoduses from your company. You need to make an environment where people feel safe, secure, they can express their creativity. Basically, the way that I always put it is friends and family. The goal that I go when I go into any company or when I advise any startup is always create that friends and family feel. Like you're not going to work with your coworkers. You're going to work to see your friends. You're going to work. This is part of your family. That collaborative environment. Like people want to be not around other people that are jerks. People want to be around people that are friendly. People that listen to them. People that allow environments that allow your opinion matters. It doesn't matter if you're fresh out of college or if you're a 20-year veteran. Your opinion equally matters in a room full of your peers, and I think that's also super important. And then iteration. Don't be a company that gets set in your ways. Those are the companies that die. Companies that cannot evolve are companies that die, unless they're making ridiculous money. But even big companies have died because they're like, look at the taxi company. Taxi industry was huge, and then what happened? Terrible customer service, smelly cabs. And what happened? Uber came in and said, hey, we're going to create this application. And they didn't adopt the technology either in a technological world. And then Uber came in and said, you know, we're going to make friendly drivers that feel like you're more personal, you're driving with a friend. We're going to not have smelly cars, and we're going to make it cheaper. And so Uber took over the market, and taxi companies are pissed off now, but that's their fault because they didn't adapt. So adaptation is very important, and how do you adapt? Obviously, understanding the market around you is one way, and then two is, again, employee engagement. Having the proper channels set up to be able to constantly be able to talk with your employees, and part of that is creating a culture where people feel comfortable sharing their feedback. So we do a couple things. Obviously, whenever somebody decides to leave the company for whatever reason, or even if we have to let somebody go, we always do exit interviews. Which is me and the HR, our director of HR. We sit in a room and we ask them for feedback. Sometimes they share, sometimes they don't. But I think another thing that's really cool that we've adopted is we do what we call walk-in talks. Every single week, the hiring manager does a outside of the company walk-in talk with their employees or their direct reports. Every single week it happens with every single one of their direct reports. And it's just a time out of the studio because sometimes people get more comfortable when they're out off-site. They just go walking around because we have a park like right on the other side of the studio, so they go walking around through the park and they just talk. It's not directed. It's whatever they want to talk about. Just, hey, how are you doing? What can I help you with? It could be a personal conversation, it could be whatever they want. And this has been super engaging for employees. So creating that environment, and then other channels. Like we have feedback loops where there's anonymous surveys people can take. We do culture surveys every quarter too. They're all anonymous forms, and so it's really a multitude of things, and then aggregating all that data together, and then sitting in a room with leadership group and discussing, here's some of the things that we're commonly hearing, here's some of the things, and kind of creating strategies around how to get better. So it's that constant feedback loop and adaptation, I think, really plays into the retention.
The talk, when they walk, is
Mhm.
just two people?
Just 2 people.
And then when they are in a room, how many people?
The room is the room is us taking the feedback from, when we go into one of the rooms, it's me plus leadership group plus my counterpart, the director of HR, and it's us sitting and discussing.
How many people do you
It's me, my boss is the COO, and it'll be the director of HR. So it starts with just us 3, and then depending on what feedback we're receiving, we may pull people in based on what the department is. So if we're seeing a common trend of an issue or something occurring in one department, we may bring that person in and have a conversation specifically about that department. But the overall strategy is discussed between me, the director of HR, and our COO.
Okay, sorry, we're gonna have to keep going.
I'm
We'll
sorry.
have questions. It's okay. But thank you for the questions. They're great. Jess, did you want to share something?
Yeah, so I think the way that our company's mission plays into our recruiting strategy generally is that our employee value proposition is strong. First and foremost, you get to build game-changing businesses with funding, resources. So you get the benefits of a startup environment, but without the resource constraints or without the risk involved. You get to work under the umbrella of a very well-established company like Boston Consulting Group. And so that's a very strong value proposition for a lot of technical talent. You're constantly building new businesses, new products. And I think that end-to-end experience ultimately is what drives our mission, and it's what drives our hiring. And so we're looking for people who fit well into what that scope looks like, what that methodology looks like. And the way that that resonates with candidates is pretty strong in the market. I say that how we retain talent is very much so aligned to what your company does. So we're a very feedback-based culture, and we take a very human-centered approach to everything that we do. So engagement surveys, we do one-on-one interviews to understand how our employees are feeling, and we try to apply that feedback where applicable. We obviously know that we can't boil the ocean and solve everyone's problems. So we try to take a very scaled approach. So prioritize one thing at a time and pick out the low-hanging fruit. I think some other things that really drive the retention in our organization, and something that I've directly impacted, is we have employee resource groups, and it's very grassroots for us because we are a smaller organization, but they do matter. So you bring in diverse talent, and then what happens once they're there? Do they have connection points? Do they have friends? I'm obviously one of their first friends when they join, but who else can they connect with? And so something that I directly impacted was I launched our Black Employee Network. And we also have a women's network. We have pretty much anything you could think about. If you like to work out, we have a DV Fit Club so that you can then go and work out with people who share the same interests. We have a social impact committee where if you're into community service, you can also make impacts and strides there in helping to solve community problems. So I think those are very strong retention tools, value propositions for our employees. And I think the last thing, just from a retention standpoint, is the growth path. So it's really important that someone understands where they're going. Where they start their journey is not where you want them to end when they leave your company. So we tell our employees, when you come here, we don't expect you to stay forever. We recognize that you're entrepreneurs and you have that spirit in you. That's why you're here. But we recognize that at some point you may leave. And when you do leave, it may be for one of our venture companies that we're launching. And that actually does happen. But that also creates a value proposition for our employees. Not only can you grow internally, but you also have this indirect career path where you can then go and serve as an operator at one of our portfolio startup companies. And I think that all of those things help to retain our talent because they're engaged, they're working on different industries, different products, and then they have an exit strategy that's still connected to our company in a very interesting way.
Yeah, so it sounds like community is a strong thing that candidates are looking for, employees are looking for. So having that connectedness to not only the company's missions and culture, but personally with other people who they're working with. So thank you so much for sharing. So we have about less than 5 minutes. So if anyone has a question, we could take that.
Give others a chance.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'll ask a question.
Definitely.
Should I ask?
He has one behind you.
Okay, I have one. So are you guys developing and designing inside of virtual reality, or are you using some of the tools like what Penrose Studios is doing?
So like, yes and no. Like we're still developing on a normal computer monitor. It's still just like you would develop a normal game, but obviously when you're testing anything you develop, you have to be in VR to test it. So like, it's back and forth, but you're still developing on a normal screen.
Okay.
Just like you would be if you were at a traditional game studio or a tech company. But you, obviously every single person in the studio has a Oculus Rift at their desk because they need to, because they're gonna build some art, then they need to go into VR and see how it functions in VR to test it.
Rift, not the Vive or the Vive Pro?
No, because the difference is Oculus Rift is very good for space issues, right? It's very, because the sensors are not 360, they're right in front of you, and so we have a 3D printer, so we built custom stands that literally mount on top of our monitors. Everybody has dual monitors, and we just mount the sensors up there, and then you can sit at your desk. You don't have to get up, you don't have to have room scale. The problem with the Vive is fantastic, but the Vive you need space for. It's bigger. And then PSVR, obviously you need space for that. You need PlayStations and all. Then you would need to add a PlayStation onto the desk, and that becomes an issue. So the Oculus Rift is the easiest thing to test with directly from your desk. But of course we have PSVRs and Vives all throughout the dev floor because it's necessary.
So we have 2 more minutes, so I'll take the lady behind us.
Both of you mentioned about the cultural fit. So when you are assessing that, is it through one-to-one interviews or do you use any tools customized for your organization to know whether the candidate is culturally fit for your organization?
So we don't use any specific tools, and I actually am not a fan of fit. I like culture add. And the reason I say that is because I think that it's very important for people around the table to have different experiences so that they're looking at problems from different lenses. And so typically when we're assessing the culture aspect, it's exactly aligned to what I mentioned earlier. The past experiences in startup ecosystem, and maybe it is larger tech companies, but what did they do there? What did they specifically drive? Were they, working directly with the product? Were they managing clients and stakeholders, managing up, managing down? That's the type of environment that you will work in our environment, because we are client services focused. And so I think it's more so around having the skills and the experiences to be able to manage those conversations with C-level executives on the client side, et cetera. But then also being able to collaborate and get along with your peers, but not to the point where if you identify an issue, you're afraid to challenge it. And so I think that that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, and again, the way that we kind of screen for that is large panels, not putting too many people in the same room because then people hive mind. So only 2 people per panel, and the interviews last 4 or 5 hours. And it's, again, diversity in the panel. So diversity in discipline and diversity in cultural background as well. So minimum, we have 10 people interview 1 person when they come on site. So it's that collectiveness that helps for us to screen for that. And again, the same thing, when I talk about culture fit for me, it's are they a team player, are they collaborative, are they passionate for games? But by no means do we want to hive mind where somebody thinks like the other 40 people that are in the studio, because then you're not going to get any creativity. The company's not going to grow forward. It's important to have people that look through a different lens, but look through a different lens in a collaborative way. Yeah. So it's not they're going to come in and be like strong-arm their opinion, but they know they have the social skills to be able to have a conversation if they disagree with somebody, to do it in a way that's not going to become argumentative, that's not going to create a toxic environment. So somebody that's like, I'm listening, but I also think this, and maybe we should work together on this, and more of that soft skill approach, and that's what's important. But yes, having people come in, even for us too specifically, like every candidate always asks me, or one of the things they say automatically defensively when I'm interviewing them on the very first phone call is, I don't have any VR experience, is that going to be a problem? And I'm like, no, in fact, I like that you don't have any VR experience because we are so used to being in VR that we may think about certain things a certain way, and by you coming from a non-VR background, you may rethink things that we're doing and present a totally new idea that totally changes the game for us. Because part of what our company does besides building content is we're also technology innovators. The reason we become a brand name in VR is because, obviously we're a first to market company in our space with our game raw data. It was the first game ever in VR to sell over $1 million in sales. And then we've owned the market since then because we've continued to rapidly release content. We've got 6 titles in the market now, and we're working on 3 more. And so it's just super important to have that innovative mentality coming into the studio.
Right. I want to take a moment. I believe Drew and Jasmine will still be here hanging out. So if you want to ask questions to them after this panel, you're more than welcome to. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer those questions on a one-to-one basis. But yes, I wanted to give a round of applause to Drew and Jasmine for being a part of our panel. And thank you all for your attention and for your questions, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.